So thank you for taking the time to speak to us today, Rosie. We know that you speak English, French, German and Italian. Could you tell us a bit about the pros and cons of learning languages immersively?
Learning languages immersively for me was the door to language learning because I started learning them as a child, and I started learning languages because we travelled a lot as a family. Travelling to the countries very early on and hearing the sound of the languages, because it was, we travelled all over, it was magical to me. It was also because I was very musical. I am very musical, and my dad was very musical, and we just picked them up. We were like magpies, picked up bits of languages wherever we went. It's a communication tool which gave me a real inroad into the country I was visiting, and I learnt that at a very, very young age, that if I wanted to get to know a culture and a country and people really well, that I wanted to speak their language. I wanted to be there with them. So that continued all the way through school, and to be able to sing a few songs, understand lyrics, that kind of thing in the foreign languages. Whereas teachers would have the more formal approach, and they'd say, when you greet someone in French, you say "Comment allez-vous?" and you shake their hand. But in fact, when you're in France, you don't say to a person when you meet them "Comment allez-vous?" and shake their hand. You say "Ça va?" That's the difference between formal learning and immersive, real-life learning, colloquialism, if you like.
So what inspired you to want to be a modern languages student?
Well, for me, it was predictable that I was going to study languages. I loved English as well. I did English, French, German and Latin for A level. But I always thought that languages would push me just a little bit further. And I couldn't choose between French and German. So, and I travelled to both countries. I love them both. And I thought, well, they're two sides of me as well. So do them both, which was a bit masochistic, to be honest. It was hard, but it was the right choice. And it was a perfectly natural choice for me, route for me to take.
So was it always your plan to become a journalist, and how have languages helped in your career as a journalist?
I didn't know I was going to become a journalist when I was studying languages at all. It wasn't an obvious choice, but I did go to Germany quite soon, and I happened to meet people who worked in the media and broadcasting. And broadcasting was very different from print journalism. And I could perform, I could go on telly, I could go on the radio, and because I had been performing also as a singer and so on too, and I'd done a lot of acting, it seemed a perfectly natural thing to do to go into broadcasting. So that became my form of journalism, and I was very, very lucky to fall in with the right people at a very young age, and sort of snuck into it, and snuck into international journalism, foreign affairs, as opposed to going the route which many people do, and rightfully it's a much better route to go into local journalism. I really believe in local journalism and then spreading out, but I just happened to do it the other way, and my languages were a passport. I couldn't have done any of it without speaking German, French and later Italian.
You've mentioned performance, and we know that you love fashion and the arts. Do you think that the love of culture is important in language learning?
For me, language learning is, and this may sound really crass, but it's life. If you learn a language, it is part of the fabric of your life. It is the way I talk to you. I mean, you and I are using language. When I'm in other countries, luckily I can use a few of the other ones. But, all these things, culture, the way we communicate with people, it's all part of the same thing. And for me, it is absolutely integrated, embedded into my very identity. So the fact that I love fashion and that I know the Italian words for fashion, learned a lot of my Italian from fashion magazines, and from cookbooks, and because I learned Italian not at university but more immersively just by being there. It just means that, and from music too. It meant that that culture was absolutely integral to the way I learn languages.
What advice would you give to young people that are looking at learning languages today?
I would always say to young people, learn a language. In fact, I think it's criminal not to teach languages at school, not to give everybody the opportunity. I mean, in the same way that English and maths are difficult when you start off, every subject is difficult when you start off. But a language is a cognitive door, if you like, to a deeper sense of yourself. You also become very different when you speak different languages. And I think children are very excited when they master a few phrases and words, and I just think it's essential. It gives people more confidence as well when they travel. It makes us less isolated as individuals as well. So I would say always learn a language and give it a go. Not everybody is good at it, but everybody can learn a few phrases, and it will always link up with another subject, because languages link up with geography, they link up with history, they link up with psychology, with business, with trade. They're not isolated. It's like maths and English are not isolated subjects. They are subjects we use in our lives. It's the same with languages, same with any subject. But give it a go, definitely.
And what does language learning mean to you?
Language or languages, whichever way you want to put it, have made me the person you see before you. And I'm so grateful that I'm so grateful that I was introduced to languages at a very early age. I'm grateful to my parents, to my teachers, and it gave me a kind of outlet for my personality, which I suppose was always quite extrovert. I'm not saying you have to be an extrovert to learn languages, but it does help. If you're a bit of a sponge, and you like talking, and I've always liked talking them, speaking them more than I do actually doing the grammar and all that, but I do that too, but it's important as well.
You mentioned that you like the sound of languages. Is there a particular language above all that you prefer the sound of, either when you speak it or when you hear it?
In order to speak any language, you have to like the sound of it. And I love the sound of French, and I love the sound of German, and I love the sound of Italian. And I love the fact that they make me into different people. I mean, wenn ich Deutsch spreche, dann bin ich natürlich ein bisschen formal und so, ne? Bin ich so. Mais quand je parle français, c'est totalement différent. C'est totalement différent. Je suis douce, je suis plus gentille. And parliamo italiano, è qualcosa di differente. Possibile, non lo so, sono più drammatiche, più passionate. So you can just tell what you do with different languages. That may not have been totally correct, but you get the feeling for the languages just by speaking them, the sound of them. So I love all of them, really.
Do you have a favourite word in any of the languages that you speak?
I have lots of favourite words in all the languages, and it just makes it fun because, languages are fun. Once you get to that stage, you get past that hump of learning, and they just, they come, and you can understand them, and you can play with them. In French, French is a very abstract language, so you have lots of beautiful words, like the word for rainfall is pluviosité. And we would say rainfall, very solid and English, and they say pluviosité, which is such a lovely sounding word. And then you've got the word for male chauvinist pig, which is phallocrate. Now that sounds nice, doesn't it? But it's horrible, of course. And then if you look at the origins of the word chauvinist, it's actually a French word. It's named after a Frenchman called Chauvin, who was one of Napoleon's sidekicks. So there are really interesting ways to look at the origins of language as well through individual words. And spelling's not everything. I mean, I know everybody bangs on about spelling, but you know what? It's the way the language sounds, which is most fun. And Italian, because I learned Italian and learn it mostly through fashion magazines and cookbooks and music. I do actually come up with some fantastic ones, and you have to forgive me because some of them are just so. There's one. My favourite Italian word of all time, is an onomatopoeic word, and it is chiacchierare. Chiacchierare, which means to chatter. And it sounds the way it is. And when you hear lots of women in the village I know really well in Italy, and they're going clack, 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 they're doing chiacchierare, and they sound like little birds, And then I've got all the words like I learned la bellezza for beauty, il rosetto lipstick. Il collana, the necklace. Orecchini for earrings and things like that. So I'd sort of go through doing that, and learning Italian that way. And, I denti, I labbri, and so on. And I thought, that sounds pretty neat. So lots of favourite words.
Well, thank you very much for welcoming us into your home, Rosie. It's been great hearing about your love of learning languages.
It was a pleasure. There's nothing I like more than talking about languages.